Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm just a casual racer, and today I want to show you my force feedback setup for Le Mans Ultimate on the Fanatec CSL DD. So if we jump into controls here and go to force feedback, I'll show you what I have set up here. So you're going to want the force feedback effects on, obviously. Sometimes you may need to invert force feedback. This is based off the R Factor 2 physics engine and game engine. And so sometimes you need to invert the force feedback with the pin in your wheel. I have not had that issue with my CSL DD. I have the boost back, so I have it put at 8. If you do not, you'd want to put this at 5. I really like the way they've kind of done this, is just basing the kind of peak strength a little bit on the torque capability of the wheel. I think this is a really good way to do it. I don't know if they've got it fully dialed in yet. I'll explain that a little as we go, but yeah, I think this is a good way to do it. I put the force feedback strength on 90%, which feels good to me, but also there's no way to see exactly right now how much the force feedback, if it's clipping or where it is. There's no force feedback meter that I can find in the UI. So just to play it a little safe as well, I've put it at 90%. If you're on the 5 Newton meter CSL DD, you could experiment with going up to 100%. I would not go over 100% strength though at all. You're going to be clipping at that point. So but I think 90% feels quite good. Even on a 5 Newton meter, I think you'd still get quite a good amount of feedback. I'll give some advice on what you could potentially do to help on the 5 Newton meter, to give you a little more detail. Force feedback smoothing, this is like a damping effect at 0 on a direct drive. I left this at default at 40. Minimum steering torque, you're going to want this on 0%. I mean, it literally says that on the right up here, do not use a direct drive wheel, so 0%. Car specific force feedback strength, we'll get back to this, okay, in a moment. Steering resistance, this is the default 10%. I experimented with this. Going down, you don't want to go down. Going up didn't seem to really do much that I could notice, so just leave it here, seemed to be best. A collision strength by default 150%. I reduced this to 120%. It seems to be quite good. You're still getting a 20% boost, which is going to take you to 108% overall. So you might be clipping a little bit, but if you're going into a collision or something like that, you know, hitting a wall, little clipping isn't necessarily the worst thing if you get the real good raw force from that. So 120, maybe you go 110, depends what you want. Also depends how, you know, obviously this is for the CSL DD, but if you're using this maybe for a wheel, like a semi-cube wheel or much stronger force feedback wheel, then obviously you might want this lower, or obviously you can just lower the overall strength, which is what this is a multiplier upon. Curb vibration strength, I put this at 0%. I just think it's canned effect. It's not necessary on a direct drive wheel. Curb pull strength, this was at 150%. This is a quite massive effect, in my opinion. I put this down at 110%. One reason why I did that is because then you have 90% normally, but this then with another 10% on top of that goes to 98%. And that seemed to work quite well. I think it keeps you from clipping, but also there's some felt bumps, felt curbs. It seemed to do good, especially in combination. This is normally at 0.1 on the curb update threshold, which means you kind of get a minimum amount of force. I reduced this to 0, and it just made the whole curve feel great on my 8 Newton meter wheel. And it wasn't that it was horrible with it, but it just overall just made it a naturaler curve. Felt way better once I turned that down. I would say if you're not quite getting enough detail, I would experiment with one of these two settings. Either take this up to 0.1, which could give you the detail on your 5 Newton meter wheel without the boost pack, or maybe you experiment with ticking this up to like 115, I don't know, something like that. But overall, this seemed quite good. So I would probably say if it's not quite enough detail, experiment with this. Otherwise, I think this is about as good as you're going to get, at least with the current day one version of the game, right? So they could do some updates to the physics. Steering torque sensitivity 0%, constant, you definitely want this off down here. All right, so now let's get into the final thing. Now, this is a big thing. Okay, the LMP, as of day one launch for Le Mans Ultimate, the LMP2 and the GTE cars, car-specific force feedback strength is 100%. Unfortunately, it doesn't save per car right now, which is something that Studio 397 needs to fix on motorsport games, because it doesn't save per car. If it's saved per car, then what I'm about to tell you isn't a big issue. But for the Hypercars, you're going to want to boost this by about 20%. You can experiment, maybe 25, 15, whatever, but they're weaker than the LMP2 and the GTE cars to a point where actually at 100% it's pretty bad. But whereas at the LMP2 cars and all the GTE cars, this is great. So what I would recommend right now is mapping the force feedback button Where is that at? I believe it's in here somewhere. Reset force feedback. Maybe they don't have it in here. You might have to do it each self. Thankfully, you can adjust it while even in a race. So you can pull up the menu, come in here. It's not like it's a complicated menu. But I will say, like, you will have to change this if you're going back and forth between, like, the Hypercars and, you know, the LMP2 or GT cars back and forth, want to do a lot of changing. Make sure to check this every single time. You're going to want this at 100% for the LMP2 car and all the GTE cars. And then you're going to want to boost this. I run it at 120% personally. For when I'm in the Hypercars. And that just gives me essentially an equivalent detailed feeling. So hopefully that gets fixed. I mean, that's a small change that they could do by default for the Hypercars to just bring them into the same range. And then you don't have to keep changing it back and forth. So I would assume this will get fixed pretty soon. So if it has, you know, you'll find that out pretty quick if you just try this by default. So try the settings as they are here. If they're still low on the Hypercars, that hasn't been fixed, then try boosting that up a little bit. So these are my settings for Le Mans Ultimate. Oh, and people always ask me too, what are my Fanatec settings? Default. I don't change that. Just makes it easier for when I find recommendations and things like that. So if you do want to change something in there, that's on you. But I'm using the default Fanatec settings for the CSL DD. So, alrighty. Hopefully this helps you. I'm going to put out a couple more videos, hopefully on some force feedback. Wheelbases. If you have a force feedback wheelbase you would like me to put up here. I don't have any, I have a Cammus 15 Newton meter direct drive wheelbase, so I do have that one as a direct drive, but these are my only two direct drive wheelbases, is the Fanatec CSL and the Cammus. I do have a bunch of more entry-level belt and gear range options from Logitech, from Thrustmaster, so I'm going to jump into some of those and do some quick recommendations on force feedback for those wheels as well. All right. Hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully it gets you guys to enjoying Le Mans Ultimate a little bit better with a little bit more detail in your force feedback. But most of all, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week.